Have you ever wondered if you are providing the right light for your orchids, or you're just starting and you don't know where to place your orchid, if that window is right, or which type of light you should provide for your collection? So I will cover a little bit about light requirements for your orchids if you grow them indoors today. If this kind of content is something that you are interested about, please hang out with me. I hope it will be interesting. Just as a caveat before we dive into the subject, I will share with you my own experience. First of all, I live in London, so my climate is more like towards the cool and humid side. I live in the northern hemisphere, so I will tell you exactly the type of windowsill if you live in the northern hemisphere and also in the south. But I also grow my orchids inside. I don't have any outdoor area, so if that's the kind of content that you are looking for, this is the right video for you. But if you're looking for people that grow their orchids outside and in their gardens, unfortunately I can't cover it because I don't have any experience with that. Apart from the time when I'm growing up as a child, I will cover specific lighting requirement for indoor orchids. So let's start. I decided to show you this one first because I have this beautiful red orchid, and as you can see, I love red. And I found this cascading so beautiful. That's an Oncidian, just to illustrate the beginning of the video, but I will move this out of the way. I'll give you a few tips and tricks, and also I will navigate with you a little bit about orchids, habitats, and light requirements for them in their natural habitats. To start, I decided to choose this spot because I'm in between my growing lights and my natural sunlight spot. I don't know if you know about it, but orchids are the biggest family of plants that colonize our planets. We have a diverse amount of species adapted to different types of environments. So light requirements usually varies across different species, but most of the orchids that we decided to grow indoors, they are adapted to at least intermediate levels of lighting. In the forest, most of the species as well, they will be in the average, like 50% light with 50% shade. I'm talking more about these kind of orchids, the ones that we can grow indoors, but with a few tricks. In my case, and that's what I want to show you and explore with you today, I don't have an outdoor area, I don't have many window sills, I live in a flat, in an apartment, so I want to show you that's possible to offer the adequate light for your plants, even if you live in a flat like I do. For instance, I live in a cool and cold country. Winter, we have a very dark period without not enough sunlight for my plants, but it's still possible to grow them without any artificial lighting. I'll give you a few examples after I explain the different lighting requirements, but I opted to have some artificial lighting so I can have my orchids spread all over my house. If I depend on my windowsill, they would have to be here. That's the brighter area that I have, and I don't have space to keep all of them here. That's why I use artificial lighting as well. So first of all, as I said, orchids, they have different light requirements, but the ones that we have in our homes, we can safely have them in our windowsills if live in the northern hemisphere and you offer them a south or east southern exposure. These are the brightest light that you can offer to your orchid. So if you live in the northern hemisphere like I do, and you have windowsills that have south and east exposure, you can safely place your orchid near these windows. But be careful if you have direct sunlight, for example, for the whole day, especially in the middle of the day, because it can burn your orchid leaves. So if the light is pretty strong towards the middle of the day, you can place some curtains, something that will filter the light for your plant. But I know that most of the people say you need growing lights in order to bloom your orchid. If you do have a window like the one behind me that offer you a proper bright exposure, you can safely bloom your orchid even living in a cool country. And I can prove that. If you doubt it, I can prove that. I will give you a few examples now. Let's go. Before I go to examples, it's the same thing. If you live down south in the south hemisphere, you can also place your orchids near a north and west window. It will be the same thing, but be careful again with direct sunlight because you can definitely burn the leaves of your orchid. But let me show you my examples with my own experience. Plants that I don't offer any growing lights and they are doing super fine, although they are highlight plants. Let's go. So as you can see here, I have my Vanda sanderiana. Vanda sanderiana is a species from Asia, and Vandas are usually known for being highlight plants, and people say that you need to grow them under growing lights when you live in a place where we don't have natural sunlight for the whole year. But this Vanda is never under growing light. It is on this bright spot for the whole year, even during winter when the day starts here between 9 and it's already dark at 4 p.m. This Vanda blooms every year for me, and it is exposure to only natural light. That's what I was mentioning, saying that it's possible. If you have a bright spot, you can keep your plants there for the whole year, even highlight orchid. I have other examples there. I have Brassivola. I also have Cattleyas here. My Cattleyas, they are much better exposure to this direct sunlight than to the growing lights. I keep my highlight plants very close to these window sills because this is the brightest spot that I have in my house. What I would advise you is for you to research which type of orchid do you have, and if this plant is a highlight plant or if this plant is a low light plant. That makes a huge difference when choosing the spot. But I would say that most of the plants that you find locally in garden centers, nurseries, you can definitely expose them to these kind of windows, and to be safe, use some curtains, something to filter the sunlight. If you notice that the leaves start to look very weird and showing brown spots, that means that they are being burned. But if you have some sort of window like that, you can safely place your plants there. Other examples that I have here are some Brassias and Oncidians and Intergenerics. They are also highlight plants, but they tolerate more a medium light than Vandas and Cattleyas, I would say. But my Brassia, it was under growing light and was not blooming for me for 2 years. So I decided to place it near these windows, and finally it starts spiking. You should definitely observe if your plant is not blooming for, let's say, 2 years. Maybe you should change the lighting exposure because probably your plant's not receiving enough light to bloom. So Oncidians, Intergenerics, they are also towards the brighter light than the lower light. So look for a bright spot like this one with some filtered sunlight and place it near this windowsill. They will love and they will bloom for you maybe multiple times a year. What I would definitely tell you to look for is the coloring of the leaves. Usually, if your plant is exposed to very bright light, especially Oncidians, and they are not very happy, like Miltonias as well, that's not an Oncidian like this one, these plants the leaves start to become yellowish and a very strange tone of yellow. So I noticed that they were being exposed to too much light. I'll give you a few examples for you to look at the leaves. The leaves can tell you exactly if you're exposing your plants to the right light or not. So if you find a bright spot like this one, perfect spot, you place your plant, and with time, Miltonias, Miltoniopsis, Oncidians, Intergenerics start showing this weird yellowish patch on their leaves, which probably means that you're offering too much light. In this case, ideally, you can take it a little bit further from the light source or found a spot that will not damage the plant. It's different. I do find that with Cattleyas, for them to bloom with natural sunlight, it's good to have some yellowish on their leaves, otherwise they don't bloom. But with intergenerics and oncidiums, when you notice that's too much yellowish like this one here, it's probably a sign that you should move your plant and find a new spot for them. But I have here a Vandaceous type of orchid, and you can see here that I have some purple tint. That's a chemical substance called anthocyanin, and that's normal. That's a substance that plants produce when they are exposed to high light. It's a protection mechanism, but it means that this plant is receiving adequate amount of light. For some highlight plants, it's also good to see some anthocyanin on them. It means that I'm definitely providing some bright light, and this plant's receiving bright light. This is the kind of plants that usually don't bloom if I don't offer it enough light. So I'm so happy with this tint in here. But again, if your plant is becoming completely purplish, everything is purple, it probably means that you need to move your plant to another location. So talking about leaves, sometimes super dark green leaves, especially in oncidiums, if you notice that they are only completely like a dark green and they are not blooming, you are not providing the right amount of lighting. So it's ideal that you move it to a closer bright spot, if that's possible. So it's a combination of factors. Usually Phalaenopsis, they do tend to have like dark green leaves. If they come closer to a bright spot of light, they will start showing some purple tint. But Phalaenopsis, that are the most common plants that we find in supermarkets around here, they are low to intermediate lighting plants. In their case, you don't need to have bright, super bright window like this one. You can leave them in your office space or shade. Ideally, you should place some curtains and place it on a table where you have intermediate light. These plants will grow and bloom for you super, super happy. But again, if it's in a very dark spot where you don't have almost any natural light, your plant probably won't bloom for you because it needs their light. You can even let it very close to a bright spot, but be careful with the leaves. You don't want to burn your leaves. But these plants, they are like more towards intermediate lighting, so they are very easy. What I do with my Phalaenopsis, I usually keep them under growing light. I don't have amazing growing lights on the lower part of this shelving, but for Phalaenopsis they work great. Other plants that are also not bright light are Paphiopedilums. So I will show you how I keep my Paphiopedilums. But my Paphiopedilums, they are in the north facing window. It's the worst lighting. I know that I shouldn't, but they do well there. They even bloom for me. So they are receiving filtered light. They do have natural light. When it's summer like now, towards the end of the day, they receive some direct sunlight in there and they are doing super well. So if you have Phalaenopsis, Paphiopedilums, you can definitely keep them around your house where you're receiving some natural light, but you don't need to give them the brightest spot. Leave the brightest spot for Cattleyas, Vandas, Oncidiums. They will be much better there. And always remember to look to the leaves of your orchids. Remember, leaves will tell you if you are providing the right amount of light or not. If you're like me and you don't have much space towards your windowsill, how do you know if you are giving the light, or how can you improve the lighting for your orchid? Especially if you live indoors and again, you don't have outside or outdoor areas. That's my case. The solution that I found was to use some growing light. So I have shelvings where I place the growing light. It was a whole learning curve for me. So I did buy some bulbs that were not growing lights to save some money. They didn't work very well. For example, my Tolumnias, they are not blooming because I didn't find a bright spot for them. But I have here some thin lights that I bought on Amazon. I'll link them down below for you. They came from United States. They have more red light and a little bit of blue light in here. But Cattleyas do bloom near this lighting, but they have to be very close to it. If you come close, you can feel like the warmth here. Because this shelving is very tall, I had to lift my plants, my highlight plants, for them to be able to bloom. It's the same thing in here. I have some highlight I use for my vandas and for my oncidiums, and they are doing great. So I'll definitely link this lighting down below for you, but I would go with strong lights if you have a tall shelving or space like that, because the lighting needs to hit the leaves, and the leaves must be able to photosynthesize and produce the right substance to be able to bloom. I had to change my lightings because I noticed that my plants were not blooming. So if you notice that your plant's not growing well, not large leaves, larger pseudobulbs, each pseudobulb that your plant will produce must be large, or each leaf ideally should be larger as well. So if your plant's not producing the right, everything is okay, you have roots, your plant's healthy, but you notice that it's not growing well, and mainly it's not blooming for you, you probably have some problem with your lighting. If you're offering everything else, check the lighting and probably change the lighting. That's what I'm gonna do now. I do have some lighting in my bedroom that's not good for my plants. I can see they are not performing as well as I would like, so I bought some new lights. I have some Barina lightings now. I will try them. I haven't tried them before. And I'll check how my plants will perform. If your plants are not blooming, definitely it's lighting. What I would definitely advise you to do is to change your growing light or offer them some growing lights, especially if you live indoors. Growing lights help a lot. The orchids, they grow and they bloom. It is possible to do that with growing lights if you don't have windowsills. But even if you live in a cool country, that's what I want to tell you, you can definitely keep them in the south and east exposure and they will bloom for you, which is amazing because you don't need to spend money with growing lights if you don't want to, and you have the space. So I have a proof with my Vanda Sanderiana that's a reliable bloomer and bloom every year for me, and it's a highlight tropical plant. But in here as well, I will give you some close-ups. This Cattleya always blooms for me under growing light. It's a reliable bloomer. I have purple tint on these leaves. That's a sign that this one is also receiving adequate amount of light. So Cattleyas usually they need to be closer to highlight for them to perform well. And the last thing that I want to tell you is be careful with seedlings, baby plants. Don't place them where you have the strongest amount of lighting come through because they are very sensitive, they are babies. So they need to be in a place where you receive light or more towards the intermediate side, otherwise they can dehydrate and die pretty quickly. So if you're dealing with smaller plants, tiny babies, be careful with them. Don't offer them too much light. Intermediate light would be ideal for baby plants. And that's it actually. I hope I have answered some of your questions about lighting. I hope you can use some of the tips and tricks that I showed you on this video to grow your Paphiopedilums, your Phalaenopsis, your Vandas, Oncidiums, Cattleyas, or any other type of orchids that you desire. If you have any comments or if you wanna ask questions, please leave comments down below. Hit the like button, I would love to see you here, and subscribe to my channel because it helps me a lot, and I hope to see you soon. Bye bye!